She filled in as a hotel receptionist for a day, unaware she'd check in a millionaire who'd changed her life. Under the flickering light of the front desk lamp, Emily's fingers danced across the keyboard, trying to make sense of the outdated reservation system. It was her first time working a hotel shift, and she was only there because her best friend Jenna had called 2 hours earlier, voice hoarse from fever, practically begging her to fill in. The hotel was small, tucked between shuttered shops and quiet alleys, but tonight's rain made everything feel more isolated. The door chimed. Emily looked up, startled. A tall man stepped in from the downpour, rain dripping from his black coat, shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of the weather mirrored something inside him. His dark hair clung to his forehead, and his eyes, those eyes, were lifeless, hollow, as if they had not seen light for far too long. She cleared her throat and put on her best smile. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" He hesitated, standing a little too long in silence. I'm not sure," he said, voice low, almost raspy. "I called earlier." She nodded and began typing. "No problem. What name should I check under?" Again that pause. He looked at her, not just at her face, but through her, like someone trying to decide whether to speak or disappear. "Graham," he said finally. "Graham Weston?" Emily entered the name and quickly found the booking. "Got it, room 204, one night, king bed, late checkout." He didn't respond. "Would you like help with anything else?" she asked, handing him the key card. Graham took the card slowly. Their fingers brushed for a split second, but he didn't flinch. Nor did he smile. "Thank you," he murmured, then turned. Halfway to the elevator, he stopped. Emily watched as he stood still, back to her, unmoving for nearly 5 seconds. Then he turned his head slightly, just enough that she saw the side of his face again. His eyes, distant and empty, met hers for a second. Then he stepped inside the elevator and was gone. She exhaled. Something about him unsettled her, not in fear but in sorrow, like watching someone drowning while still standing on dry land. An hour passed. The lobby remained quiet. Emily settled back into her chair behind the desk, idly scrolling through old magazines. Rain tapped gently on the windows, a steady rhythm that matched the ticking of the wall clock above her. Then something caught her eye. Outside, past the glass doors, barely visible through the sheets of rain, was a figure. She stood up slowly, no umbrella, no movement. Just a man sitting on the metal bench in the small balcony garden outside room 204. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't on his phone. He was just sitting, motionless, drenched, like he didn't feel the cold at all. Emily pressed closer to the glass. It was Graham. She glanced at the clock. It had been over an hour since he checked in. Still, he sat there, head bowed, shoulders sagging. She wanted to step out, to ask if he was okay, but something held her back. Not fear, intuition, an unshakable feeling that this wasn't just a man caught in the rain. This was someone trying to feel something, anything. A flash of lightning lit up the sky behind him. For a moment, his silhouette was sharp against the wet stone walls, hands clenched together like in prayer or despair. Emily's chest tightened. She turned away from the window, heart pounding, unsure why her throat felt tight. Back at the desk, she stared at the blank notepad beside the phone, and slowly, almost without thinking, she tore a piece from it. She picked up a pen. Her hand hovered for a moment, then she wrote a single sentence. She folded the note carefully. No one came into the lobby after that. The rain fell harder, and Emily sat quietly, the folded piece of paper resting in her palm, waiting for the right moment. Emily did not sleep that night, even after her shift ended, even after the manager returned and thanked her with a tired smile, even after she walked the 12 blocks home with sore feet and damp clothes. Her mind remained stuck on the man in room 204. Graham Weston. She repeated the name silently, again and again, as though it might unlock something. The way he'd stood on the balcony for over an hour, in the cold rain without flinching, it haunted her. It wasn't just sadness in his eyes. It was vacancy, a kind of stillness that whispered not peace, but surrender. as if his body remained only because no one had told it to stop breathing yet. By clock a.m. she was still awake, wrapped in a worn blanket, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed. Her tiny apartment buzzed faintly with the sounds of distant traffic and a neighbor's television. Her knees were pulled up to her chest, her thoughts looping endlessly. She had seen that look before, on herself, in mirrors, in moments when the world felt too heavy to carry. She reached for the battered spiral notebook she kept beside her bed. It usually held grocery lists, work schedules, reminders to call her landlord or email professors. She flipped to a blank page, then paused. What could she say to a man she didn't know? What could she possibly write that wouldn't sound naive? She didn't overthink it. She let her hand move, her heart speaking faster than her mind. If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think. No name, no explanation. Just that. It wasn't advice. It wasn't pity. It was truth, one she needed to hear herself sometimes. Before dawn, she returned to the hotel. She told the night receptionist that she'd left her phone charger in the break room. No one questioned her. Room 204 was still occupied. A faint strip of warm light glowed from beneath the door. Emily crouched, folded the paper in half, and gently slid it under with a shaky finger. Her heart thumped in her throat. She stood for a moment, staring at the number on the door, then walked away. The next morning, she returned to her normal life. Graham was gone, checked out before sunrise. No message, no note, no trace. His room was cleared, his name crossed off the log. When Emily asked Jenna at the front desk if he'd said anything, Jenna only shrugged. Nothing. Handed me the key and walked out. Didn't even ask for a receipt. A strange feeling bloomed in Emily's chest. Not sadness, not exactly, just hollowness, like waiting for a reply that never came. She told herself she was being foolish. He was a stranger, a man she'd seen once. It was silly to expect a sign, a thank you, a smile. But still, she had hoped for something. Instead, all she got was silence. Days passed. She went back to the chaos of her life. Bookstore shifts in the morning, cafe work in the evenings, library hours squeezed between. Her bank balance dropped. Her tuition bill loomed. Her college advisor warned that without payment, her enrollment might be suspended. The pressure pressed down harder. She tried to forget room 204, but sometimes, when she was closing the cafe alone, wiping down the counters to the hum of a floor fan, she would remember the rain-soaked man on the balcony, the one with eyes like doorways to nowhere, and she wondered, not constantly, but in quiet flashes, did that note matter? Did he read it? Was he okay? She would never know. But deep down she hoped, desperately, silently, that those 12 words had held him just long enough, that maybe, just maybe, they had caught someone on the brink. 2 months had passed since that rainy night. Emily had folded the memory of Graham into a quiet corner of her mind, filed somewhere between fleeting curiosity and silent hope. Life had not slowed down. If anything, it had grown heavier. Tuition fees mounted, her cafe shifts grew longer, and the bookstore had cut back her hours due to low sales. So when she opened her email one morning and saw a message titled Employment Opportunity, Assistant to Executive Director, she assumed it was spam until she read the details. Her full name was spelled correctly. The message mentioned a personal recommendation. The sender was a major corporation in the health tech sector, Etherion, a company she had only vaguely heard of from the news. She reread the email 3 times. She had never applied for this job. A contact number was listed. She dialed it with shaking fingers, half expecting a machine to answer. "Good morning, this is Catherine from Etherion," a cheerful voice said. "Is this Miss Emily Clark?" "Yes," she stammered. "We're delighted you received our message. We'd like to invite you for an in-person meeting with our executive director regarding the assistant position." "I think there's been a mistake," Emily said. "I never applied." There was a pause. "Actually, you were referred by someone who asked to remain anonymous for now." Emily agreed to the meeting, unable to explain why, her heart thrumming with unease and something dangerously close to excitement. 3 days later, she found herself standing in front of Etherion's gleaming headquarters, wearing her best second-hand blazer and the only heels she owned. The lobby was polished marble and glass. Every step she took echoed. She was escorted to the executive floor. "Wait here," the assistant said, gesturing to a door. Emily stepped inside. The office was flooded with light from ceiling-high windows, modern, minimal, and at the far end, behind a sleek desk of black walnut, stood a man in a tailored suit, his back turned as he looked out over the skyline. He turned, and Emily stopped breathing. It was him, Graham, but not the man from room 204. His version stood tall, shoulders squared, clean-shaven, hair neatly styled. His eyes still held depth, but now they were awake. He smiled gently. "Hello, Emily," he said. She blinked, stunned. "You? You work here?" "I run it," he replied. "Etherion was my company from the start. I've just returned." She could barely find words. "I don't understand." Graham stepped forward, pulling something from his jacket pocket, a folded piece of paper. It was worn at the edges, water-stained but still legible, her handwriting. "If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think." "I kept it," he said softly. "I read it 3 times that morning, and then I got up, packed my bag, and checked out. Not because I felt better, but because I realized someone out there believed I might be worth saving." Emily stared at the note in his hand, her chest tightening. "I had planned," he continued, "to end everything that night. I will not lie to you. I was not in pain. I was numb. I believed nothing mattered. But that line you wrote—" He looked at her now, voice trembling just slightly. "It interrupted that silence in my mind. It was the first voice that didn't sound like judgment or shame. It was hope." Emily swallowed hard, emotions rising. I didn't know. I was scared. You looked like someone who needed to hear something real." "You were right," Graham said, "and I needed more than anything to hear that I wasn't invisible." Silence fell between them, thick and sacred. Then he said, "I asked the hotel staff for your name. I didn't want to intrude, so I waited until I had something real to offer." He motioned toward the desk. "This position is yours, if you want it, not as charity, not as repayment, but because I believe you belong in a place where your voice matters." Emily looked at him, really looked. He was still the man from that rainy night, but so much more. And somehow, so was she. Working beside Graham became the most unexpected routine of Emily's life. Each morning she entered the towering Etherion building with a quiet resolve, and left each evening feeling like she had stepped into someone else's story. But it wasn't fantasy. It was real. And it was happening to her. Graham, now back in his full role as CEO, was nothing like the cold executives she had imagined from the outside. He was respectful, composed, but there was a warmth beneath his calm. A warmth that showed itself in small gestures. He brought her hot tea at exactly 3:00 p.m. every afternoon. Chamomile, because he'd remembered her mentioning she didn't like caffeine. When it rained, he was already at the entrance with an umbrella, holding it above her head with that same quiet expression, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And every time she achieved something small, a well-organized file, a last-minute meeting arranged, he would smile and say, "Thank you, brave one." At first, she thought it was just a callback to the note, but after weeks of hearing it, the way he said it started to sound different, like a truth he genuinely believed about her. And every time she heard it, she stood a little taller. They developed a rhythm. He invited her once to a street food cart after work, a tiny vendor tucked between 2 buildings, known for the best grilled corn in the city. She laughed when he didn't know how to eat it without getting chili powder on his shirt. He laughed, too, full and real. On other evenings, they stayed behind in the company's small employee library, helping the volunteer staff reshelf books after hours. Graham never announced his presence there. He just rolled up his sleeves and sorted biographies by spine color instead of author name, grinning like a child when corrected. One night, as they walked out, they passed an older security guard struggling with his shoe. The sole had come loose, flapping awkwardly. Graham stopped without a word, knelt down, and used a spare roll of strong tape from his briefcase to bind the man's shoe tightly. "That'll hold for a few days," he said kindly, and patted the man's shoulder. Emily watched, heart clenched. It wasn't about status or performance. It was just who he was. Someone who noticed the unnoticed. Someone who remembered what it was like to feel invisible. And maybe, she thought, that's why he saw her. They began to talk more, not just about work, but about memories, childhood, fears, what they wanted to be before life forced them into survival mode. But there was always a line neither crossed. It sat there, quiet but heavy, between their chairs and meetings, in the pauses between jokes, in the small silences after laughter. Neither of them acknowledged it, but both of them felt it. One evening, as they waited outside in the company's side garden, just a narrow green strip between buildings with 2 worn benches and a single cherry tree, Emily broke the silence. Her voice was soft. "I used to sell bottled water in movie theaters." Graham turned, brows slightly raised. "I wore a uniform, 3 sizes too big. My shoes always squeaked when I walked. I dropped a whole tray once and cried in the break room for an hour." He said nothing, waiting. She looked away, fiddling with the sleeve of her cardigan. "I never finished college," she continued. "Couldn't afford it. Most days I still don't know half the jargon people use here. I Google things when I get home. I rehearse answers before meetings." Graham's voice was low. "You are doing more than fine." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I don't belong in a place like this, not really." Then, almost like a whisper, she added, "I'm just a girl who once sold water at the movies. I don't belong in your world." Graham turned fully toward her. His expression wasn't pity, it was something deeper, something careful. He opened his mouth to respond, but paused. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the same note she had written, the one he still carried, folded with care. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. And in that moment, Emily wasn't sure if she felt comforted or more afraid of how deeply this man could see her. It was late, well past office hours, and the building had fallen into a gentle hush. Outside the window, the city glowed softly, muted under the falling dusk. Emily and Graham sat across from each other in the small break room, half-empty mugs of tea between them. Graham looked tired, but not the kind of tired that came from long meetings or endless emails. This was a weariness born deep in the bones, the kind that settled in the soul. "I owe you a story," he said quietly, eyes fixed on the swirling tea in his cup. Emily tilted her head, listening. "You know I'm the CEO," he said, "but you don't know why I wasn't here until recently." She nodded slowly. She had always wondered about the gap. The whispers around the office, the half-finished sentences in articles she had found online. He leaned back in his chair, the lamplight catching the sharp planes of his face. 6 months ago, a device my company developed, an advanced implant for post-surgical monitoring, malfunctioned during a routine operation. The patient died on the table. Emily's breath hitched. "The failure wasn't caused by our core technology," he said. "It was a defect in a third-party component. Something we should have caught but didn't in time." He paused. The media didn't care about nuance. Headlines screamed, "Tech CEO plays God with human lives." Ethereum's gamble turns fatal. I became the face of greed, of arrogance, of reckless ambition. He swallowed. Investors fled. Our stock collapsed overnight. I stepped down to protect what little integrity the company still had. Emily sat in stunned silence. "But that wasn't the worst part," he said. His voice dropped, almost a whisper. "The brother of the man who died found me, waited outside the courthouse. He didn't scream. He just looked me in the eye and said, 'I hope you live long enough to feel the guilt I do every day.'" A long, still silence passed between them. "That night," Graham continued, "was the first time I didn't sleep at all. The guilt, it ate through me like acid. Not because I pulled the trigger, because I built the gun, and people trusted me with it." He looked down at his hands. "I started drifting, walking through days like they weren't real. I stopped taking calls. I couldn't touch a prototype without shaking. I told myself I was a disease in the shape of a man. Everything I created hurt someone." Emily's eyes burned. "And then," he said, smiling faintly, I checked into a small hotel. No luggage, no return ticket. I didn't plan to check out. She knew. Her heart thudded. But under the door, he said, pulling out the now crumpled note from his wallet. This was waiting for me. He handed it to her. She took it with shaking fingers. If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think. I read it. I read it 10 times. I cried for the first time in weeks, and then I ordered breakfast. Graham leaned back again, voice steadier now. That day, I decided to stop hiding. I hired independent investigators, forced open sealed reports, reran every test. It took 3 months, but the truth came out. It wasn't our tech. It wasn't my team. It was a flaw in one supplier's code, buried under 10 layers of subcontracting. Emily was silent. I didn't sue. I didn't announce anything. I took the report to the victim's family myself. I sat with them, every week, for 2 months, until their son's name didn't taste like acid when I said it. And the company? It's recovering, he said. Slowly. We've rebuilt most of the trust. But I came back, different. I came back knowing power isn't about vision, it's about responsibility. He looked at her now, his voice lower. And that's when I found you again. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she placed the note down on the table. Her throat tightened and her chest ached in a way she couldn't explain. She had walked into this job thinking she was just a helper, a lucky girl, an afterthought. But sitting across from this man, she realized something powerful. He wasn't a hero, he was a survivor, and so was she. The weeks that followed were the gentlest Emily had ever known. She and Graham worked closely on a new project, a health outreach initiative for underserved communities. It was his idea, but he always introduced it as theirs. Together, they mapped out mobile clinic routes, partnered with nonprofit organizations, and visited local centers. Every meeting, every discussion, felt like building something that mattered. And always, Graham was attentive in quiet, almost invisible ways. He would place a cup of warm water on her desk just as she sat down, without needing to ask her preference. If he noticed she was buried in emails, he would leave a small note, breathe. If her hands were cold in the conference room, he would slide over his mug for her to hold. Somehow, he had learned that she liked flashcards for new words. So one day, tucked between a stack of meeting folders, she found a fresh pack labeled, "Today's English, from your quiet supporter." Emily began to feel safe, but with that safety came a gnawing fear. She couldn't name it at first. It crept in between compliments and thoughtful gestures, blooming quietly in moments when no one else was watching. It whispered to her when she passed the mirror in the executive elevator, or when she walked through corridors lined with glass walls and confident stares. The question circled her heart like a shadow. Do I really belong here? Or am I just passing through someone else's world? At one of the company's formal networking dinners, Emily wore a simple navy dress, borrowed from a neighbor, and tucked her hair back with trembling fingers. She had tried to walk like she belonged, speak like she belonged. But then came the whisper. Near the dessert table, 2 colleagues, well-dressed, confident, the kind who'd never once said hello, stood chatting. One of them glanced toward her and smirked. "Nice of the CEO to bring his assistant," he said. "Though I guess when someone saves your life, it buys them a seat at the table." The other chuckled. "Or maybe she's just very persuasive." Emily froze. She didn't confront them. She didn't even turn around. She just walked out of the room, the laughter following her like a ghost. The night air was sharp, the stars too quiet. Inside her chest, something twisted. Back at her table, Graham was still speaking with a guest speaker. He hadn't noticed she'd left. Or maybe he had, but gave her space. It didn't matter. She returned briefly, just long enough to slide a folded note onto his plate. Then she left. The note read, "You saved me from despair, but now I need to save myself from forgetting who I am." She didn't go home right away. She walked for hours, through neighborhoods that reminded her of where she came from, past clothed markets and dim-lit laundromats, places where no one knew her name, but every corner held a version of the girl she used to be. Emily wasn't angry. She was afraid that she was starting to measure her worth by the gentleness of someone else's world, afraid that every kind thing Graham did, though it was real and beautiful, might also be stitching her into a life she hadn't earned yet. She needed to step back, not to escape him, but to find herself, independent of the man who once made her feel seen. Because if love was to grow, and she was honest enough now to name it love, it had to bloom between two whole people, not one reaching up and the other pulling down. She owed that to herself, and to him. Emily handed in her letter the following Monday. It wasn't a resignation, but a quiet step back, a request for an indefinite leave of absence, typed neatly, sealed in a simple envelope, and left on Graham's desk before the office filled with voices and the day became loud. She didn't wait to see his reaction. She didn't linger for approval. The letter said everything she needed it to. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for helping me begin. But now, I have to walk this next part of the road on my own. She left her badge beside the envelope, its lanyard coiled neatly like a ribbon on a gift. Then she walked out through the glass doors without a goodbye. But she knew somehow he would understand. That evening she sat at her small kitchen table and enrolled in a night class program at the local college. Business communications, digital literacy, and a workshop in nonprofit management. Her schedule became a map of sacrifice. Tutoring children from 8 a.m. to noon, doing freelance data entry from home until mid-afternoon, then rushing across town to attend classes until 10 p.m. Her new apartment was modest. One room, no elevator, no balcony. But the rent was hers to pay, the furniture hers to choose, and the silence at the end of each day hers to keep. There were no gifts from Graham, no favors pulled, no hidden strings. He had offered to help, quietly, respectfully. A scholarship here, a contact there. She declined, not out of pride but purpose, because she didn't want to be built by someone else's kindness. She wanted to be whole, to come back to him not as a girl rescued, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself. He never pressed, and still, his presence lingered. They messaged, not every day, but often enough, not with declarations of longing, but with small truths. Had to do a 5-minute pitch today. I didn't faint. Tried that ramen place you mentioned. Verdict, 7/10. Needs more garlic. Found a word that means healing in progress. Will send later. It was strange. Being apart yet held. It wasn't romance, not in the traditional sense, but it was something more durable, and somewhere between exhaustion and growth, Emily realized she wasn't surviving anymore. She was living. Each rent check paid, each child she helped read a paragraph without stumbling, each night she fell asleep on her own terms. It was all a thread, weaving a life that finally felt like her own design. And still, some nights, when the city grew quiet and her textbooks were closed, she would open her journal and write. One entry, penned under the hum of midnight rain, remained her favorite. He waited at the edge of my storm, not to pull me out, just to hold the umbrella if I ever turned back. If he's still there when I find my center, then we can begin again, not from chapter 1, but from chapter 2, as two whole people who choose each other. 2 years passed. Emily stood before a packed auditorium, the lights warm on her face, the microphone gentle in her hand. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a simple twist, and she wore a navy dress that had once belonged to her mother. She didn't need a teleprompter. Her voice, once shy and uncertain, now carried clarity and quiet confidence. She had grown into her story, not just the one others told about her, but the one she had learned to tell herself. She was being honored for her work with a nonprofit organization that provided literacy programs and healthcare access for underprivileged women. The project had started with one borrowed classroom, 2 students, and a stack of donated books. Now it was a statewide network. Hundreds of women, mothers, survivors, daughters, could now write their names, understand prescriptions, ask questions without fear. As the standing ovation echoed through the hall, Emily looked out over the crowd. She saw familiar faces, students who had become volunteers, doctors who had once doubted her, now nodding with pride. And still, she felt her heart skip, not from nerves, but from something else, a sense that the moment wasn't quite complete. When the applause finally faded and the formalities ended, she stepped off the stage and into the crowd, shaking hands, hugging old friends, laughing with the women whose lives now intertwined with hers. And then she saw him, standing in the back row, away from the spotlights and cameras, dressed in quiet gray, his figure tall and composed, his hair a little longer now, a touch of silver at the temples. Graham. He hadn't reserved a seat at the front. He hadn't sent flowers or a message. He had simply come. Their eyes met across the room, and everything else, the noise, the lights, the movement, seemed to fade. Later that evening, they found themselves walking together along the riverside, the same river where, 2 years ago, Emily had walked alone on a stormy night, lost in questions. The air now was cool, tinged with the scent of coming rain. The path was quiet, the city muffled in the background. The lamplight flickered on the water like a memory returning home. "I never expected to see you today," Emily said softly. "I never stopped following your work," Graham replied, his voice calm. She turned slightly toward him, the corner of her mouth lifting. "You never said a word." "I didn't need to," he said. "You were already saying everything through what you did." They paused by a bench that overlooked the water. Emily traced the wood with her fingers, then looked at him. "Do you still have it?" she asked. Graham pulled out his wallet, careful and unhurried. He unfolded the worn, water-stained piece of paper, the same one she had slipped under his hotel room door so long ago. "If you are still alive today, you are braver than you think." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "You kept it?" "All my life," he said. "Because it gave mine back to me." He didn't propose, she didn't ask, but he reached for her hand, held it, and when he leaned forward to press a kiss to her forehead, it said everything words could not. Not a promise for forever, but a recognition of now, of two lives that had intersected, not out of luck or need, but purpose. In the weeks that followed, Graham returned to his foundation work, now mentoring young tech innovators in ethics and emotional leadership. Emily continued her outreach programs, expanding into rural health education for young mothers. They didn't move in together. They didn't need to. But sometimes, at the end of a long day, a message would appear on each other's phones. A single line. "Today I am still alive, so I guess I am still braver than I think." If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the quiet strength in kindness, or made you believe once again in second chances, then take a moment to reflect with us. Sometimes, the smallest words can save a life. Sometimes, healing does not come in grand gestures, but in shared silence, in a folded piece of paper, in the simple act of showing up. If you believe in the power of stories that heal, inspire, and remind us of what truly matters, then we invite you to become part of our journey. Subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more tales of resilience, love, and hope that will stay with you long after the story ends. Thank you for watching, and remember, if you're still here, you're already braver than you think. Everyone ignored her, except one millionaire with a baby, who stopped and told her something that, "You call that music? Sounds like a dying cat." The man's voice pierced the cold air as he paused on the sidewalk, frowning at the hunched figure near the abandoned bus stop. His breath fogged in the freezing air as he shook his head, disgusted. "This is New York, sweetheart. If you want money, try working for it, not torturing people." The girl on the ground didn't look up. Her fingers trembled against the strings of her battered violin. The bow skipped, snagged, faltered, but she kept playing. The melody, if it could be called that, limped along, jagged and broken, like footsteps on shattered glass. "I just need a few dollars just for tonight," she said softly, her voice dry from the cold, brittle like autumn leaves. Her lips were chapped, cheeks flushed red beneath the grime. The man laughed bitterly and walked away, his shoes crunching against the snow-covered pavement. A group of teens passed moments later. One raised a phone, recording. "Yo, check this out, straight-up horror movie soundtrack. Bet this goes viral," he said, laughing. Another girl in the group mimicked the squeaky notes, exaggerating every move. They jeered as they walked on, the sound of their laughter lingering. Betty closed her eyes for a second, held her breath, and lifted the bow again. The wind screamed down the street, slicing through her thin coat like paper. Her violin was cracked, missing a string, its once rich varnish chipped and faded. She had carried it through shelters, subway tunnels, park benches. It was the only thing that never left her. She drew the bow across the strings again. The sound that came out was raw, aching, jagged. But underneath it all was something else. Pain, yes, but also defiance. She was not asking. She was existing. Her music was a protest against being forgotten. Then the rumble of an engine broke through the silence. A sleek black Bentley slowed to a stop beside the curb. The contrast between the car's gleaming body and the dirty slush on the street was jarring. The passenger door opened. A man stepped out, tall, dressed in a charcoal coat that looked both expensive and worn from too many nights without rest. In his arms, a baby writhed, red-faced, tiny fists curled tightly, crying hoarsely. Betty kept playing. The man did not speak. He stood still, just watching. And slowly, incredibly, the child stopped crying. The music was not beautiful in the traditional sense. It was cracked, weary, but there was something soothing about it. Maybe it was the rhythm, maybe the honesty. The baby blinked once, then twice, and its tiny body relaxed. A soft sigh escaped its lips, and then sleep. The man's shoulders lowered, a fraction. He looked at the girl now, really looked. Her cheeks were raw from the wind. Her gloves were fingerless, soaked through. The violin's case was a broken plastic box. She had no hat, no scarf. He stepped closer. With one hand, he reached into his coat and pulled out his wallet. Silently, he took a crisp $100 bill and placed it into her container. Betty froze. "I haven't slept in 3 days," he said, his voice gravelly from exhaustion. "She hasn't either. No white noise, no lullabies, no medicine, but your music, it worked." Betty looked at him now, really looked. His eyes were deep-set, rimmed with fatigue but warm. "Honest. Thank you," she whispered. The man didn't say anything for a second. Then he unwound the dark gray scarf from around his neck and gently draped it over her shoulders. She stiffened, startled. "Here," he said, his tone low, careful. From the car he retrieved a silver thermos and a collapsible cup. He poured tea, steam curling upward like a prom, and handed it to her. "It's just chamomile, no strings attached." She took it, her hands shaking, and held the warm cup close. The steam stung her cracked lips. The heat felt like a miracle. "I'm Justin," he said finally. "And that's Sophie," Betty nodded. "Betty." Justin crouched slightly, looking her in the eye. "Do you have somewhere warm to go?" Betty hesitated. She looked down, as if embarrassed by the truth. "No." "Then come with me," he said gently. "Just for the night. Just until you're warm." She stared at him. This man was a stranger, a man in a Bentley with a sleeping baby, offering her tea, kindness, a ride. Everything in her said run, that people like him did not help girls like her. But Sophie stirred, made a soft baby noise in her sleep, and Betty looked at her. Then she looked back at Justin. His eyes hadn't changed. Still calm, still kind. "Okay," she whispered. She stood slowly, clutching her violin, scarf still draped over her shoulders. Justin opened the door. She stepped in, cautious, like someone entering a church for the first time. As the Bentley pulled away from the curb, the snow continued to fall, silent, steady, and somehow, suddenly, less cold. The city lights gave way to quiet streets lined with trees and elegant buildings as the Bentley moved deeper into the Upper East Side. Betty sat in silence, clutching her violin case tightly to her chest. The scarf around her shoulders still held the faint scent of cedar and something clean, something safe. She watched the world pass by through the tinted window, eyes wide and wary, heart thudding with every turn the car took. Justin glanced at her only once, briefly, through the rearview mirror. He did not ask questions. Sophie remained asleep in her car seat, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed almost too delicate for this world. When the car finally stopped, Betty saw it. A tall, stately house behind a black wrought iron gate. It was not ostentatious, not dripping in gold or glass, but it was large, clearly expensive, and glowing softly from within. Warm light spilled through the windows like a silent invitation. Justin stepped out, gently lifted Sophie from her seat, then opened the door for Betty. She hesitated. Her boots, wet and torn, hovered just above the clean stone of the walkway. "You are safe here," Justin said quietly. Betty nodded, more to herself than to him, and stepped out. The door opened before they even reached it. A woman in her late 60s stood in the entrance, her gray hair twisted into a neat bun, apron spotless. Her face was kind, her eyes bright. "Mr. Caldwell," she said with a smile, "and this must be our guest." "This is Betty," Justin said. The woman turned to her. "I'm Clara. I've made up the guest room. Come in, dear, it's freezing out." Betty stepped inside. The house smelled like vanilla and something floral. Lavender, maybe? There were bookshelves lining the hallway, soft rugs underfoot, and gentle lighting that made everything feel lived in, not just beautiful but warm, human. Clara led the way up a short flight of stairs. The room was small compared to the house, but large by Betty's standards. A bed with a thick quilt, a dresser with a vase of fresh flowers, and a small armchair by the window. Betty stood at the threshold, frozen. She shook her head. I don't need all that," she murmured. "The floor is fine, really." Clara's smile faltered only for a moment, then returned, soft and understanding. "Of course, dear, whatever makes you comfortable." Betty sank to the floor in the corner, tucking her violin close to her chest like a shield. She pulled the scarf tighter, her eyes darting around the room, looking for hidden traps that weren't there. Justin appeared in the doorway. He held another cup of tea, steam rising gently. "You do not have to be on edge," he said calmly. "You helped my daughter sleep. That matters more to me than you know." He placed the tea on the nightstand and stepped back. "I'll let you rest. Good night, Betty." He left without closing the door fully. It remained cracked just a little, like a silent promise. Betty did not touch the bed. She sat on the floor for a long time, sipping the tea in small, cautious sips. Her body ached from the cold, but she refused to lie down. Around midnight, she heard soft footsteps in the hall. She stiffened, heart racing. Her fingers gripped the violin case. The door creaked open gently. "Just bringing an extra blanket," Clara whispered, setting it at the foot of the bed. "You might get cold." Betty said nothing. Clara nodded once and left, the door closing with a quiet click. Betty stared at the blanket for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached out and pulled it over herself. She leaned back against the wall, curled into herself, and closed her eyes. She had slept on sidewalks, in train stations, behind dumpsters, but here, on this floor with a blanket that smelled like sunshine, she did not shiver. For the first time in years, Betty slept without fear. The house was quiet in the early mornings, save for the occasional soft cry from Sophie, echoing down the hallway. Betty, though still unsure if she truly belonged, had begun to wake before anyone else. Wrapped in the navy scarf Justin had given her, she would tiptoe downstairs, violin case in hand, and sit in the sunlit corner of the living room near the grand bay windows. It became a rhythm. By the third morning, Sophie stirred as usual around 6:15 a.m., and Clara, ever graceful, brought her into the room where Betty waited. The baby would calm instantly at the sight of her and the gentle sounds that followed. Each evening, too, Betty played beside Sophie's crib. Her notes were soft, tentative at first, but grew steadier as the days passed. The music was no longer harsh survival. It was a lullaby, spun from the same hands that had once trembled in the snow. One night, as the last of her notes lingered in the air, Betty passed Justin's study and glimpsed him through the half-open door. He sat in a deep leather chair, his tall frame slouched forward. In his hands was a photo frame, worn at the edges. The woman in the picture, Anna, smiled brightly in a summer garden, her arms cradling a newborn Sophie. Betty froze. Justin's head was bowed, his thumb brushing the glass in slow, aching circles. His eyes were red, but he made no sound. There were no sobs, just silence. A silence heavy with... Betty quietly turned away. She returned to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed. For the first time since arriving, she placed the violin gently on the comforter instead of hugging it to sleep. Something had shifted. The next morning, over a quiet breakfast of oatmeal and tea, Justin cleared his throat. "You saw me last night," he said without looking up. Betty hesitated. Spoon paused mid-air. "I did not mean to. I was just walking past." He nodded slowly, then met her eyes. Anna passed away 3 days after Sophie was born. Complications. She held Sophie once, and then she was gone. Betty lowered her gaze, unsure of what to say. "I do not know how to do this," he continued. "Being a father, being alone. Some days I feel like I am going through motions I do not understand. But when Sophie hears your music," he exhaled, "she sleeps. And I breathe." Betty looked at him, eyes softening. "I have never seen someone grieve so quietly," she said. Justin gave a small, broken smile. "I have never let anyone see me cry." Betty said nothing more. But that night, when Sophie stirred, her lullaby was fuller, richer. She played not only to soothe the child, but to reach out, maybe not in words, but in the only language she trusted. Despite the warmth of the house, Betty still kept her boundaries. She washed her own clothes by hand in the bathroom sink. She drank tea from the dented thermos she carried when she arrived. The guest room remained sparsely touched. The drawers were empty, the closet door never opened. Clara noticed, of course, but she never pried. Justin, too, respected the invisible walls Betty maintained. He offered no lectures, no demands, just space. In time, Betty began to read some of the books lining the living room shelves. She found an old collection of Chopin's nocturnes, pages worn and marked in pencil. She practiced them quietly during the day when no one watched. Sophie started to recognize her melody. One afternoon, as Betty played near the nursery window, Sophie, now 4 months old, reached out a chubby hand and touched the strings. It made a strange sound, awkward and squeaky. Betty laughed, genuinely, a sound even she had almost forgotten. That night she wrote in a small notebook Clara had left on the bedside table, "Music used to keep me alive, now it keeps me human." The late afternoon light spilled across the nursery as Sophie clapped her tiny hands, trying to mimic the beat Betty tapped gently on the wooden floor. 1, 2, 1, 2, Betty said softly, her smile cautious but sincere. Sophie giggled in response, wobbling slightly in her attempt to stand. Each day brought small steps like this. Baby laughter, shared glances, melodies played without a need for reason. Betty was beginning to settle into the rhythm of the house, of caring, of being seen. And yet, inside her, a quiet storm brewed. That storm struck one chilly Tuesday afternoon. Betty was halfway to the kitchen when a sharp pain clenched her lower abdomen, stopping her cold. Her knees buckled, and she barely caught the edge of the wall before sinking to the floor. Sweat broke out on her forehead, and she curled inward, trying to breathe through the stabbing sensation. The next thing she heard was hurried footsteps. "Betty?" Justin's voice was taut with concern. He dropped beside her, eyes scanning her pale face, his hand reaching for her shoulder. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "I am fine," she muttered through clenched teeth. "You are clearly not fine." She tried to sit up. "It is just pain. It will pass. I do not need your pity." Justin stilled. He looked at her for a moment, his brow furrowed, then said quietly, "This is not pity, Betty. This is concern. This is admiration." He hesitated, his voice firm yet tender. "You are stronger than you think." Betty turned away from him, jaw tight. Her body trembled from both pain and shame. She was not used to being helped, not like this. She was used to hiding her pain in alleyways, wrapping it in silence and swallowing it whole. Justin said nothing more. He stood and walked to the nearby bookshelf, retrieved a warm water bottle Clara had tucked there just in case, and set it gently by her side. Then he crossed to the window, his back to her, watching the trees sway in the wind outside. He was giving her space. That simple act, more than any words, unraveled something inside her. Betty stared at the water bottle for a long time before slowly pressing it to her side. The warmth seeped in, not just through her skin but through the walls she had wrapped around herself. She felt tears prick her eyes and turned away to hide them. She fell asleep on the couch later that evening, the violin beside her, untouched. At dusk, she woke to Sophie's soft cries. Betty rose, slower than usual, but made her way to the nursery. The baby reached out instinctively, her face lighting up at the sight of Betty. That small gesture, pure, without expectation, soothed the ache inside. That night, Betty sat by the crib and played. The notes were lower, slower, touched with pain, but also resolution. She was not playing for survival. She was not playing for someone else. She was playing for the girl she used to be. The one who, long ago, sat in a cramped apartment while her mother hummed over a pot of boiling water and said, "Let the music take the hunger away." Betty's fingers moved with memory and longing. In the hallway, Justin leaned silently against the doorframe. He listened with eyes closed, arms folded, not daring to speak. He knew this music was not meant for him, but he also knew it meant she was healing. Little by little, note by note. The air in the nursery was filled with quiet giggles and the soft rustling of pages as Betty held Sophie on her lap, gently reading a picture book aloud. Sophie, now 10 months old, leaned against her with complete trust, her chubby hand resting on Betty's arm, eyes wide with curiosity. It had become a routine now. Morning lullabies, playful clapping games, whispered bedtime stories. Betty had found herself woven into the fabric of Sophie's world, steadily, almost without realizing it. The little girl's face lit up each time Betty entered the room, and when she cried, only Betty's voice seemed to calm her. One evening, as the sky turned a soft rose above the tall windows of the house, Justin approached Betty while she was folding Sophie's tiny clothes on the living room couch. His hands were in his pockets, and he looked uncharacteristically uncertain. "Betty," he began, "I have been thinking." She looked up, her expression neutral. "You have become more than just a guest in this house. Sophie adores you. She laughs with you. She sleeps when you play. I know it might sound formal, but would you consider becoming her nanny? Officially, I mean." Betty blinked, startled. "Nanny?" she repeated, as if testing the word on her tongue. "I am not asking because of your music," Justin continued, kneeling slightly to meet her eye. "I am asking because you are the only person she smiles for some days. You are her person, and that means everything." Betty set down a folded onesie, her hands suddenly feeling too big. "I do not have the qualifications, no training, no degree." Justin's voice softened. "You have a heart. You care for her like she is your own. No paper certificate could matter more than that." Silence stretched between them. Then Justin stood and stepped out of the room. A few moments later, he returned, holding a long, rectangular case wrapped in a soft velvet cloth. He set it gently on the table in front of her. "I have something for you." Betty eyed the case warily, then slowly opened it. Inside lay her violin, no longer cracked, no longer missing a string. The wood gleamed, restored but not replaced, its scars polished into something beautiful. The familiar curve of the neck, the subtle grain of the body, it was hers, but whole. "I found someone to repair it," Justin said. "Someone who understood that not everything broken needs to be replaced. Some things deserve a second chance." Betty's breath caught. Her fingers hovered above the instrument, trembling. "I thought," Justin added quietly, "maybe you deserve that chance too." The words hit deeper than he probably intended. Betty stood abruptly, trying to steady herself. Her eyes brimmed with tears, and she turned away, brushing them off with the back of her sleeve. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You do not owe me anything." "No," he replied, "but I am grateful. For you, for what you have brought into this home, and for what you have brought back into me." Betty looked at the violin again. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep in the hush of twilight, Betty sat alone in the music room. The violin lay on her lap like a trusted friend returned from a long journey. She cradled it gently, ran her fingers along the strings, then lifted the bow. She played, not to chase away hunger, not to drown out the cold, but for joy. The music was different this time, lighter, freer. It curled through the warm air like birdsong after a storm. It was a song of possibility, of cautious hope, of roots beginning to reach for solid ground, and in the hallway, once again, Justin paused and listened, without a word, without moving. He knew better now than to interrupt the moment, because it belonged to her. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting golden rectangles on the marble floor. Betty was in the kitchen, feeding Sophie mashed banana, when Clara walked in with a newspaper folded tightly in her hand. "Betty," she said softly, "I think you should see this." Betty wiped her hands on a dishcloth and took the paper. Her heart began to pound as her eyes landed on the headline, splashed across the front of the lifestyle section. Millionaire and the Violin Girl, a secret or a sympathy project. The article was written by James Lawton, Justin's longtime friend and a well-known columnist known for stirring the pot. The piece detailed how a mysterious, homeless violinist had been taken into the Caldwell estate, implying a relationship born out of Justin's loneliness and misplaced charity, rather than love or sincerity. It mentioned her playing in the streets, how she moved in without credentials, and speculated on the emotional instability of a widowed father making reckless decisions. Betty's face drained of color. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, the paper trembling in her hand. Later that day, when Justin returned from a meeting, she was waiting by the door, the article crumpled tightly in her fist. "Did you see this?" she asked quietly. "I did," Justin replied, voice even. "I cannot stay here," she said. "Not when people think when they think you took me in like some charity case. What if Sophie grows up and reads this? What if it hurts her?" Justin stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "People will always have something to say. But they do not live here. They do not know Sophie, or you, or us." Betty shook her head. "This is your world, Justin. I do not belong in it, and I refuse to be the reason your name is dragged through the mud." "I am not worried about my name," he said. "I am worried about Sophie, about what it will mean to her if the woman she loves disappears." Her breath hitched, but she stayed quiet. "And I am worried," he added, softer now, "about losing the peace of this home that only you can fill." She looked at him, eyes burning. "This is not about pity, Betty, or charity. You are family. You belong here, not because of what you do for Sophie, but because of who you are." Still, she could not ignore the churning inside her, shame, doubt, old wounds reopened by cruel words printed in black and white. That night, she packed a small bag and moved her things to a guest room farther down the hall. "Just until this blows over," she told Clara, who only nodded, her eyes kind but sad. In the days that followed, Betty kept her distance from Justin. She remained devoted to Sophie, playing with her, feeding her, humming lullabies each evening. But she avoided the quiet dinners and long walks they once shared. The warmth that had begun to grow between them now sat waiting in a corner, unsaid and unresolved. One evening, as the city lights blinked through the nursery window, Betty held Sophie in her arms and rocked her gently. The violin rested beside her on the chair. She lifted it slowly, ran her fingers across the strings, and began to play. The melody was soft, almost hesitant, but her notes wove themselves around the little girl like a blanket. Sophie stirred once, then stilled, her tiny hand curling into Betty's shirt. Tears welled in Betty's eyes as she played. She played through the ache in her chest, through the storm of shame and fear, through the memory of Justin's words, "You are family." The music trembled, then steadied, because she realized in that moment no headline could define her bond with Sophie. No gossip could undo what had been built in quiet moments of care, of laughter, of song. And as her bow slowed and the last note faded, Betty bent down and kissed Sophie's forehead. "I am still here," she whispered, "and I am not leaving." The night was unusually quiet. A snowstorm had swept across New York, knocking out power in several neighborhoods. The Caldwell residence, tucked away on the Upper East Side, was wrapped in a soft silence, broken only by the occasional crackle of firewood. Betty sat on a thick rug in front of the fireplace, her arms gently wrapped around little Sophie, now a bright, curious toddler. The glow of the flames danced across their faces, casting long shadows on the walls. Justin, having lit every candle he could find in the house, settled into a chair nearby, a blanket draped across his lap. "There was a time," he began, his voice low, "when I hated the dark." Betty looked up, surprised by the sudden confession. "Why?" He stirred the fire slowly. "Because it reminded me of the group home. After my mother left, I spent most of my childhood there. We had one bulb in the hallway, barely working. At night, it felt like the world forgot about us." Betty remained quiet, listening. Justin's voice trembled slightly, but he pressed on. "I used to count footsteps. Every creak in the floor meant someone was near. Every silence meant you were still alone." Sophie stirred, letting out a tiny yawn before snuggling deeper into Betty's arms. "She is lucky," Betty whispered. "She will never know that kind of fear." "That is because of you," Justin replied softly. "You brought light back into this house, Betty. Not just for Sophie. For me, too." Betty's heart skipped. She looked at him. There was no plea in his expression, no expectation. Just quiet sincerity. "My mom used to play music for me," she said, her voice barely above the hum of the fire. "We had nothing. No heater, no steady meals. But she taught me violin. Said if my stomach was empty, I could still fill my soul." Justin nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the fire. "That is beautiful. Painful, but beautiful." They sat in silence, the kind that needed no words. After a moment, Betty reached for her violin. The polished wood glowed in the firelight. She tucked it under her chin and began to play, a soft, slow lullaby that seemed to weave itself into the walls of the room. Each note was a thread, stitching warmth into the cold corners of their memories. Justin closed his eyes. He did not speak. He did not move. He simply listened, as if the music itself was something sacred. When the last note faded, Betty set the violin down. Sophie had fallen asleep in her lap. Betty brushed a strand of hair from the baby's forehead and looked up. Justin was watching her, not with longing, not with pity, but with something deeper, hope. For the first time, Betty felt it too. Not the fear of losing something she did not yet understand, but the quiet realization that maybe, just maybe, she belonged. The spring air was gentle, tinged with the fragrance of cherry blossoms that danced across the courtyard of Justin's garden. Fairy lights lined the low hedges, casting a golden glow as twilight embraced the sky. A small crowd of close friends and staff filled the rows of white chairs under the trees. In the center, under a soft spotlight, Betty stood with her violin. She closed her eyes. Then she began to play. The music was unlike any she had ever played before. It carried joy and longing, gratitude and healing. Each note felt like a chapter of her journey, from the bitter cold bus stop in Brooklyn to the warmth of the home behind her. It was not flawless, but it was human. It was hers. Sophie, now toddling and full of giggles, clapped along enthusiastically from Justin's lap. The little girl had grown strong, confident, and full of spirit, just like her mother would have wanted, just like her second mother had helped her become. As the final note faded into the spring breeze, the applause was immediate and warm. Betty gave a small bow flushed with emotion. When she stepped down from the small platform, she expected nothing more than the peace of a quiet evening. But Justin met her at the bottom of the steps. He held something in his hand, a small box. Betty's eyes widened. He knelt down, right there under the cherry blossoms, as Sophie stood beside him holding the edge of his sleeve. "Betty," he said, voice steady but tender, "you did not just bring music into this house. You brought us back to life. You gave Sophie a mother's love. You gave me hope again. You taught us both how to feel joy without guilt." He opened the box. Inside was a silver ring, simple and elegant, with an engraving on the inside that read, "Our Melody. I love you. Will you marry me?" The world stood still. Betty's hand flew to her mouth. She had not expected this, not after all they had been through, not after how carefully they had respected each other's space and time. But looking at him there, gentle, genuine, and full of love, she knew the answer had always been in her heart. She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Yes!" The crowd clapped again, but it was Sophie's tiny voice that broke everyone's composure. "Mama!" she said, reaching for Betty. Betty gathered her into her arms, tears falling freely now. There were no grand speeches, just quiet joy, the kind that stays. Months passed. The wedding was small, full of laughter and homemade decorations. Clara cried through most of it. Betty's violin played the bridal march herself. Justin wore the same suit he had worn the night he first met her, quietly sentimental. Betty's belly began to show not long after. She glowed, not from riches or fame, but from peace, from being loved and choosing to love in return. One morning, early, as birds chirped softly outside, Betty sat on the windowsill in the nursery. Sophie lay beside her, curled in a blanket. Inside her, another life stirred gently. She hummed a lullaby, one her mother had taught her long ago when the world felt too sharp and loud. Justin entered silently, placing a hand on her shoulder. They sat in silence, watching the light creep over the city skyline. "I used to play just to survive," Betty whispered. Justin rested his cheek against her hair. "And now?" She smiled. "Now, I play because I'm finally alive." They stood, hand in hand, and walked into the new day together, with music in their hearts and a family in their arms. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through music, healing, and love. If Betty's story reminded you that even the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the most life-changing moments, then you're in the right place. Here at Soul Stirring Stories, we believe in the quiet miracles that happen when people choose compassion, courage, and connection. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. We share new stories every week, stories that lift your spirit, remind you of hope, and maybe even bring a few tears, because everyone deserves a story that stirs the soul. Until next time, stay kind and stay inspired. She replaced her cousin at the airport pickup counter and picked up the wrong CEO. The early evening crowd at Los Angeles International Airport was thick with movement. Families reunited, travelers rushing, signs raised high in the air. Emma Sanchez adjusted the cap on her head, nervously checking her phone again. The name blinked on her screen. Pickup for Blake C. Terminal B, arrivals, 5:45 p.m. She exhaled and glanced around. Her first solo airport pickup since filling in for her cousin's driving gig. She was a design student, not a driver, but she needed the extra cash and her cousin swore this one would be simple. Just a quick airport pickup, the guy's name is Blake something, he should be easy to spot. Scanning the crowd, her eyes settled on a tall man standing alone near the curb, duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He wore jeans, a navy jacket, and sunglasses, despite the dimming sky. There was something self-contained and calm about him. Emma hesitated, then approached. "Excuse me," she said, trying to sound professional. "Are you Blake C.?" The man turned, removing his sunglasses. His expression was unreadable for a moment. Then he smiled slightly. "I am Blake, and I am definitely in need of a ride." Emma nodded quickly. "Great, right this way." She helped him with his bag and led him to the car. Once inside, she tapped the navigation system and asked, "Heading to downtown?" "Sure," he replied, settling back in his seat. "Let's see where the road takes us." They pulled out of the terminal. Emma kept her eyes on the road, her grip tight on the steering wheel. She stole a glance at him through the rearview mirror. There was something polished in the way he sat, the quiet confidence in his posture. He did not talk much, which suited her fine. She was nervous enough already. 10 minutes in, she checked her phone again, swiping through messages, and froze. A new message from her cousin. "Hey, your client Blake C. says he's still at Terminal B. You're late?" Emma's stomach dropped. She glanced at the man in the back seat, then back to her phone. There was no mistake. She had picked up the wrong Blake. "Oh my God," she whispered under her breath. She pulled over onto a quiet side road and turned around. I'm so sorry, she stammered. I think I picked up the wrong person. You're not the Blake I was supposed to drive. The man raised an eyebrow but remained perfectly composed. Really? Yes, she said, flushing with embarrassment. I was meant to pick up someone named Blake C., and I thought, well, you matched the description. But I just got a message that the real passenger is still waiting at the terminal. I'll call someone else to get him. I can drop you off wherever you need. He tilted his head. You're a student, aren't you? Emma blinked. How did you know? Your bag. He nodded toward the backpack in the front seat, design sketches peeking out. And the nervous energy. She gave a short, embarrassed laugh. Yeah, interior design major. I'm just filling in for my cousin. This was supposed to be easy. The man smiled again. It's all right. I'm not in a rush. She quickly dialed her friend Kara, who worked the same driving shift. Kara, can you head to Terminal B? There's a passenger named Blake C. still waiting. I picked up the wrong guy. Once she confirmed Kara was on the way, she turned to the man in the back. I'm really sorry. I'll take you anywhere you need. He waved a hand, still smiling. Honestly, I'm just arriving from London after an exhausting month. A little detour might be exactly what I needed. She glanced at him, surprised. You're very calm for someone who just got hijacked by accident. Well, he said, leaning forward slightly, if you're willing to chauffeur a lost CEO, I'm willing to be a cooperative passenger. Emma blinked. CEO? He held out his hand. Blake Carter. Nice to meet you. She took it slowly, the name ringing faint bells in her memory. It sounded familiar, but she could not place it. And you are? Emma Sanchez. Pleasure's mine, Emma. Let's go for a drive. As she merged back into traffic, she could not help but glance at him again. There was something oddly comforting about his presence, even though everything had just gone off screen. For the first time since arriving at the airport, she smiled. Sometimes, the wrong pickup might just lead to the right beginning. The drive from LAX to downtown Los Angeles stretched out under a golden California dusk. Emma glanced at the GPS. Blake Carter, CEO. Definitely not the Blake she had been meant to pick up, but he had insisted on continuing the ride like nothing was wrong. She cleared her throat, nervous but curious. So, London, huh? Business trip? Something like that, Blake replied, watching the palm trees blur past his window. I needed a change of scenery, some breathing room. Emma smiled faintly. I can relate. I do this job to escape my real job, or rather, my real future. He leaned forward slightly, intrigued. What do you actually do? I'm studying interior design, she said, glancing at him in the mirror. Final year. Between classes, I work part-time to pay rent. Someday I want to open my own design studio. You know, create spaces that feel like home, even when people forget what that feels like. Blake raised an eyebrow. That's very specific. Emma laughed. Yeah, well, when you live in a 400-square-foot shared apartment with creaky floors and weird plumbing, you start imagining better spaces. I sketch a lot, dream even more. He was silent for a second. What do you love about it? She blinked. Design? Yeah. She paused, then said, when someone walks into a room and suddenly breathes easier, not because of the furniture or the colors, but because the space lets them be themselves. That's the magic I want to create. Blake studied her through the mirror. That was not something he heard often in pitch meetings or creative boardrooms. There was no pretense in her voice, just belief. As they reached the traffic light near Broadway, Emma pointed at a faded Art Deco building across the street. See that one? Built in 1928. The original tiles are still there under that ugly modern cladding. If I had a team and the budget, I'd strip it down and restore it. Blake looked, truly looked. Her eye for detail was sharp, noticing not just structures, but soul. When they arrived at the hotel, Emma stepped out to help with his bag. As she popped the trunk and bent down, a folded sheet of paper slipped from her canvas backpack. She did not notice. She was already waving goodbye. Thanks for being cool about the mix-up, she said with a small, apologetic grin. And sorry again. Before he could respond, she was already walking briskly back to her car. Blake lifted his duffel bag and caught sight of the paper on the ground. He bent, picked it up. It was a sketch, a stunning one. Black ink, warm graphite shading, a modular shelving unit that folded seamlessly into a curved wall niche. The lines were fluid, alive. He turned it over. The bottom corner read, Horizon Concept, ES. His pulse stilled. That name. 3 years ago, he had attended a design submission auction for a collection called Horizon. An anonymous entry had caught his eye, just like this. He had bought it quietly through a private acquisition to keep it from being commercialized before it was ready. But somehow, one of the collaborating agencies had broken contract and resold the concept under a flashier name. His legal team was still untangling the mess. Blake stared at the sketch again. The lines were identical. The signature, E.S., Emma Sanchez? No, it could not be, and yet it made sense. Her words in the car, her dreams, her eye for detail, her tone when talking about lost spaces and breathing room. He folded the paper gently and slid it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Not yet, he told himself, not now, but soon. Blake sat alone in his hotel suite, the sketch still in his hand, unfolded across the glass table. It was unmistakable. The Horizon design. Her design. He opened his laptop, fingers flying across the keys as he accessed the company's proprietary archives. 3 years ago, the Horizon collection had been submitted to his company through an intermediary agency. The submission was anonymous, with only an ES as the original designer's initials. At the time, the piece had stood out so vividly that he had approved a silent purchase, requesting the design to be preserved until it found the right home. But that home had been violated. His company had outsourced prototype development to a firm in New York, Vinton Designs, and Vinton's creative director had since rebranded the Horizon concept under a new name, claiming it as a product of his team. That name on the internal agreement jumped out at Blake now like a punch to the chest. Caleb Vinton. The same name on the signature of the licensing paperwork. The same Caleb who, according to Emma's quick mention in the car, was her ex. Blake leaned back, stunned. The truth was in front of him. Emma had been the original artist, and someone close to her, had stolen her vision. 2 days later, Blake sent Emma an email under the pretense of needing help reviewing feedback from clients for a showroom mock-up. "I could use a creative eye," he wrote simply. "No pressure, just a pair of fresh lenses." Emma hesitated when she received it. She had not expected to see Blake again after the strange airport mix-up, but something about his tone, calm, curious, respectful, made her feel like she owed herself this moment. They met at the entrance of the International Interior Expo. The event was vast, filled with towering structures of glass and wood, projection lights, models of furniture so sleek they looked futuristic. Emma walked beside Blake, equal parts nervous and enthralled. He guided her silently past several booths until they reached one displaying minimalist shelving units, curved partitions, and an open modular room layout labeled as the Eclipse Collection. Emma stopped breathing. The lines, the curvature, the foundational concept. It was hers. Even the textured layering detail. Something she had once scribbled on a napkin after watching sunlight scatter across cracked pavement was replicated here in brushed steel and warm oak. She stared at it as if watching someone else's life play out in front of her. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "This is mine." Blake did not speak. He just stood beside her, watching her face. Emma's shoulders stiffened. "He told me," she said slowly, "that idea was impractical, that no client would pay for it, that I needed to stop dreaming like a student and start thinking like a worker." Her eyes burned, but she kept staring. He said no one would remember something that simple. Blake exhaled through his nose quietly. "I remembered." She turned to him, startled. "I bought that design," he said, 3 years ago, through an anonymous auction. I did not know it was yours, not until that day in the car." Emma took a step back, the world spinning slightly under her feet. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted to be sure," he said. "And because I knew, once you saw it with your own eyes, you would know what I know." She turned away, blinking quickly. Later, in the car, she sat in silence. The exhibition's glow flickered through the windows, casting patterns on the windshield like broken glass. Blake sat beside her, saying nothing. She spoke without looking at him. "I gave him everything I had, my work, my belief. I thought if I stayed quiet, I would be safe." Her voice cracked. "I was wrong." Blake reached forward, gently turning off the engine. The world outside quieted. "No," he said softly. "You were just too kind to see cruelty coming." Emma's lips trembled. She wiped at her eyes and whispered, "What do I do now?" Blake looked straight ahead. "That depends. Do you want justice, or do you want your name back?" She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. "I want both," she said. The light in Emma's apartment was dim, a single desk lamp illuminating the sketches spread out across the table. She had not slept much since the exhibition. Her phone had buzzed a few times, messages from old classmates, one even from a former professor who had seen the photos Blake had discreetly forwarded after the event, but she had not answered any of them. She was frozen between shame and confusion, caught in the weight of being seen. A soft knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find a brown envelope lying on the floor, no name, no label. Inside was a sheet of old, crinkled paper, lined, torn at the corner. A sketch, clearly drawn by hand. It showed a small, strange concept for an adjustable desk that folded into a chair. The lines were wobbly. The scale was off. It was far from professional. But at the bottom corner, there was a note, written in the same steady, elegant handwriting Blake used on company letters. "I once thought this was useless. Someone believed in me anyway, so I kept designing. Today, I believe in you." Emma blinked fast. Her throat tightened. Underneath the sketch was another sheet, a scanned email thread from 3 years ago, the anonymous submission of her design to the auction where Blake had first purchased it. It bore the initial ES and a timestamp. Proof. But Blake had not sent it to pressure her, just to show her the past was real and that she had always mattered. Later that night, they met in the quiet corner of a park cafe where Blake had reserved a table under his name. He sat, without pretense, in a worn coat that looked too modest for someone who ran a company. He stirred his tea slowly and finally said, "When I was just starting out, I had no connections, no money, and no reason to think I could make it. But there was one teacher who told me something that stuck. If you do not speak the truth, someone else will speak it for you, and they will twist it." Emma looked at him, unsure what to say. "I am not asking you to fight," he added quietly. "I am just asking you to stop apologizing for having a voice." Her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched the sketch he had given her. "I do not want people to think I am bitter or that I am only trying to claim credit." "You are not claiming anything," he said. "You are reclaiming what was always yours." The next morning, she woke up before dawn. Her hands hovered over her tablet for several minutes before she finally opened a blank post. Slowly, deliberately, she uploaded the original sketch of the Horizon series, then another image. The initial napkin sketch she had photographed before it faded. Then a third, a video clip of her discussing light flow and modular furniture from 2 years ago, recorded during a class project. She did not name anyone. She did not point fingers. She just wrote, "3 years ago, I sketched this while sitting on the floor of my apartment, dreaming of rooms that felt like healing spaces. I submitted it anonymously because I was scared. I stopped drawing when someone told me it was not good enough. But yesterday, I saw my idea on display, under someone else's name. I am not here to argue. I just want to share what it looked like when it came from the heart." She hit post. The hours passed in a blur. By evening, her story had been shared over 1,000 times. Comments flooded in. Design students, architects, even strangers, saying how her vulnerability inspired them. Some recognized the style. A few industry voices chimed in, asking questions. She received messages of support, even from professionals she had once admired from afar. Emma sat curled on her couch, overwhelmed. A message popped up. It was from Blake. "You spoke your truth and no one twisted it." She smiled through her tears, then typed back, "Thank you." for reminding me. Silence is not always safe." Blake replied a minute later. "Silence never protected anyone, but honesty? It sets people free." That night, Emma fell asleep for the first time in weeks. Her sketchpad open beside her, not as a burden, but as a promise. The days that followed felt like waves crashing over Emma's chest, relentless and suffocating. Her post had gone viral, just enough to spark attention, but not enough to protect her from the storm that followed. Within 48 hours, the design firm formerly run by her ex-boyfriend issued a formal statement. The claims being circulated online are not only inaccurate, but a blatant attempt to tarnish reputations. The designs in question were developed in-house by a registered creative team. Her inbox exploded. Some messages praised her courage, but others, anonymous, bitter, or deeply personal, called her a liar, a bitter ex, an attention seeker. She stopped checking her messages, stopped answering calls, stopped eating properly. The final blow came when the board of the International Young Designers Competition emailed her. "Given the ongoing controversy, we understand if you wish to withdraw. Please inform us by Friday." She sat in her room staring at the email, fingers hovering over the keyboard, ready to say yes. Withdraw. Disappear. Protect herself from the ugliness. It was raining that day. She had been scheduled to attend a panel hosted by a non-profit architecture group, something she had promised herself she would not miss. But halfway through, she could not bear the curious stares, the whispers, the half-formed smiles of people who were clearly unsure which side of the line she now stood on. She slipped out quietly, coat barely covering her from the downpour, trying to move fast before anyone noticed. Her boots hit a patch of water-slick concrete, and suddenly her feet lost grip. Before she could hit the ground, strong arms caught her. She gasped as Blake's face appeared above her, soaked hair falling into his eyes, concern etched deep in his features. "Easy," he said quietly. "I've got you." They stood together beneath a small concrete awning by the edge of the building. The rain poured hard, just inches away, but here in the shadow of it, it was quiet. Emma said nothing. Neither did Blake. And somehow that was enough. He did not try to offer encouragement or platitudes. He just stood beside her, unmoving, steady, like the way he had shown up from the beginning, without demand, without judgment, without asking for anything in return. She let out a long breath. It trembled, but it was full. That night, she returned home to find a small package slip through her door. Inside was a pair of dark leather gloves, soft, elegant, almost identical to the ones Blake had been wearing the first day they met at the airport. There was a note, handwritten in clean script. "When you are driving through a storm, the most important thing is not the road. It is the hands that do not let go of the wheel." She closed her eyes. The next morning, she wrote an email to the design competition. "I would like to confirm my participation, not because I want to prove anyone wrong, but because I am finally ready to drive my own story." And when she hit send, something shifted, not just in her inbox, but deep within her chest. Not defiance, not vengeance, control. Her storm had not ended, but now she had gloves to steer through it. The next day was unusually quiet. Emma stayed home, her phone turned over, ignoring notifications. She needed stillness after everything. The public backlash had calmed down, but not in her heart. She still heard the doubt, the voices saying she was only getting attention because of Blake. Around noon, a delivery arrived. A courier handed her a flat, neatly wrapped package. No return address. Just a tag on the twine that said, "You always had value. This is just the world catching up." She opened it slowly. Inside was a printed invoice, yellowed slightly with time. Her hands trembled. It was dated 3 years ago. The header read, "Purchase Confirmation, Private Design Exchange." The buyer, Blake Whitmore. The seller, EM Design. Her breath caught. That was her username. She had used it on a freelance platform during college, terrified of putting her real name on anything. That design, Horizon, she had uploaded it late one night in her dorm room, never expecting it to be noticed, and someone had bought it. No feedback, no questions, just gone. Folded beside the invoice was a note in thick black ink. "You thought the world did not see you, but I did. I kept this as a reminder that brilliance comes even in silence. Now it is time for the world to know your name." Emma stared at the letter until her vision blurred. She thought she had been chosen out of kindness or because Blake felt guilty, but he had believed in her work long before he knew her. It was not a favor. It was respect. The next morning, Emma walked into Blake's new creative studio, his own venture, announced just a week ago, a sleek space in the arts district, full of warm light and raw materials. Everything about it said, "Build something real." Blake looked up from where he was sketching near the back wall. He set his pencil down and walked over. "Hey," he said gently. "I got your package," Emma said, holding his gaze. "And your message." He waited. She smiled, small but certain. "I am still scared, but not of failing, just of not doing this at all." Blake smiled back. "Then let's start." Her office was not large, but it was hers. A nameplate already waited, Emma Rivera, Creative Director. Taped beneath it, a sticky note in familiar handwriting read, "Not given, earned." That afternoon, Blake gathered the new team, designers, interns, coordinators, and introduced Emma. "This woman changed my entire perspective years ago," he said, voice steady. "She showed me that great ideas do not care where you come from. They just need someone brave enough to share them, and someone honest enough to honor them." Emma blushed but did not look away. This time, she stood taller. After the meeting, Blake found her setting up her workspace. He placed a small box next to her laptop. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a flash drive and a handwritten label. "Horizon. Original files. Yours." Along with it, another note. "You once sold your idea because you thought it was the only way forward. Now you own it, and everything you will build next." Emma looked up at him, her eyes damp. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head, his voice soft. "Thank you for not letting the world convince you to stay small." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Blake added, "You do not have to prove anything to anyone anymore, Emma, least of all me. But just so you know, I never chose you out of sympathy. I chose you because long before I saw your face, I saw your mind, and it never let go." Emma's reply came slowly but clearly. "Then let me prove you right." She turned back to her desk and started drafting again, this time not for recognition, not to reclaim anything, but because her ideas mattered. And this studio, this title, this team, was not the end of a painful journey. It was the beginning of one she was finally building on her own terms. Emma's days were busier than ever, meetings, mock-ups, presentations, mentoring junior designers. Her name started showing up in industry forums, articles, even whispers at exhibitions. Who is this girl from nowhere? How did she become Whitmore's Studio's rising star? And yet every time someone asked about Blake, she would brush it off with a laugh, a shake of the head, or a redirect to the latest project. Not because she did not feel something, she did, deeply. But there was a quiet wall inside her that whispered, "Careful, do not ruin this with foolish dreams." Blake, for his part, never pushed. He remained steady, a presence that listened more than he spoke, that offered help without conditions. He treated her like an equal, respected her decisions. But Emma noticed things. How he always paused before knocking on her door, even when it was open. How he left extra space for her to walk beside him, never in his shadow. How he never called her his designer, only our creative director. But in the quiet moments, when emails were done and everyone had gone home, Emma would sometimes sit alone at her desk, staring at the city lights, and wonder, could someone like him really want someone like her? Her past still echoed. The old apartment with leaky ceilings, the ramen dinners, the ex who told her dreams were cute but not marketable. She remembered the stares when she first joined the studio, the assumptions, the questions hidden behind polite smiles. How did she get here? One rainy Tuesday, Emma returned from a long client presentation. She dropped her soaked coat on the rack and found a package on her chair. Wrapped simply in brown paper, no name. Inside was a soft leather-bound journal, white, unused, the kind artists rarely buy for themselves because they are too expensive to waste on mistake. Emma flipped to the first page. A single line was written in black ink, careful and deliberate. "I can go far, but I would rather stop if that place has you in it." Her breath caught. She sat down slowly, fingers tracing the letters. There was no signature, no pressure, just a door, gently opened. She held the pen for a long time before she finally wrote back, beneath his words in her own handwriting, "If I go with you, could you slow down a little?" She closed the journal and hugged it to her chest. Blake found it on his desk the next morning. He did not smile right away. He just read the line again, twice, then sat down at his chair and looked out the window. It was still raining, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like something good was beginning, slowly, gently, and with both feet finally stepping into the same direction. The grand hall of the Global Creative Design Center in New York shimmered under soft lights and banners from around the world. It was a night of elegance, of names called and futures changed. But behind the stage, Emma stood quietly, adjusting the sash of her ivory evening gown. Chosen by her team, the dress was simple, modest, and graceful, just like her. She was no longer the girl who had once picked up the wrong man at the airport. Tonight, she was Emma L. Carter, creative director of Redrive Studio, a company that in just 12 months had redefined the industry with human-centered design and sustainable aesthetics. When the host announced her name, the room erupted in applause. Emma stepped onto the stage, her expression calm yet glowing. She approached the microphone, offered a gentle smile, and said, "Thank you. A year ago I thought my dreams lived only in sketchbooks, tucked under my bed, forgotten. That is, until I picked up the wrong person at LAX. Laughter rippled through the room. She continued, her voice steady but warm. There was no fairy tale moment, no lightning bolt, just a man who did not rush to judge me for a mistake. A man who listened to the way I talked about light, structure, and the fear of never being good enough. Her eyes moved gently toward the front row. There he was, Blake Whitmore, in a charcoal tuxedo, watching her with the same quiet pride he had shown on the very first day he believed in her. People often ask me, what changed everything? I think, it was the moment someone saw worth in me, even when I could not see it myself. The host returned to the stage, inviting her to receive her award, but before she could step forward, Blake stood. He made his way onto the stage with an unassuming grace, holding a rolled-up piece of paper in his hand. The crowd fell silent. Emma tilted her head, slightly amused and confused. "Blake?" He smiled. No ring, no kneeling, just honesty. He unrolled the paper slowly, revealing a hand-drawn sketch of a house nestled in a forest clearing, sunlight spilling in through a semicircle window, exactly the style she adored. "Redrive home," he said softly. "A place for two people to begin again." Emma's breath hitched. She recognized the baselines. The original outlines were hers, but the porch, the lighting fixtures, the stone path, those were Blake's additions. They had created it together, unintentionally, across shared glances and quiet sketches. "You once took me to the wrong hotel," he said, voice tender but sure, "but you helped me find the right destination." The audience chuckled, then fell silent again as Blake stepped closer and gently took her hand. "Emma," he said, with a steadiness that wrapped around her like a promise, "I do not need an assistant. I do not need a rising star. I need someone to walk beside me, not fast, not loud, just steady, so we can build something that lasts." Emma let out a breath, half laugh, half tear, not because she was surprised, but because, finally, everything was exactly where it belonged. She did not answer with words. She stepped forward and embraced him. Right there on stage, under the lights, in front of every camera, every face that had once doubted her, dismissed her, overlooked her. And then, she leaned close, whispering into his ear, "I am ready. Let's go home." They left the stage hand in hand, walking down the long, glowing aisle and into the night, where city lights blurred like stars. As they passed the old corner store where Emma had once taken odd jobs to afford textbooks, she reached into her purse and pulled out a worn, faded receipt. "This," she said, smiling softly. "I thought I would throw this away. But now I know. The most valuable thing on it was never the numbers. It was the gaze of a stranger who chose to stay." Blake's grip tightened around her hand, not as a CEO, not as a man in power, but as someone who had finally found what he had always needed, a home, in her. And this time, they were starting from the right address. If this story stirred your heart, reminded you that even the smallest mistake can lead to the most beautiful turns, and showed you that kindness and quiet strength don't go unnoticed, then this is just the beginning of many stories waiting to reach you. At Soul Stirring Stories, we believe in tales that lift, heal, and remind us of the power of believing in others and in ourselves. If you felt seen in Emma's journey or inspired by Blake's quiet courage, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your next favorite story, the one that just might change your day or your life, is only one click away. Subscribe to Soul Stirring Stories now, and let every story remind you, love finds a way, especially when it starts with listening.